Hi, in this demonstration of Coherent Web, we're going to be looking at how to analyze the output of an XSLT transform. So what I'm going to do first of all is select an input, and then I need an XSLT file, and now we just run the transform. Okay, the first thing that we notice is there are a number of icons used, three in fact. We see these green tick boxes to show that the transform was okay. These warning triangles indicate that the transform failed for some reason, and then these information icons show us that the transform succeeded, but that there was an XSL message. So and clicking on these first of all shows the message inside this rather small message box here, but on a normal screen resolution you would see a bit more of the message than that. If clicking on message would show the message output, and here you have the option of opening this up to actually see an XML view of that. If we just bring that within the capture area, we can actually see, so we could analyze the message output, and actually as you select further files, that output is updated to show those. Okay, let's close that down. What we can see from the counters after a transform is instantly the number of failures anyway in the failed counter, and if you click on the button adjacent to that, it takes you to just plain text logs detailing the errors for each one of the failures. And in fact we're in the logs pane of this tabbed page, and we can also go to the success log that just lists all of those items that were processed, and then there's a summary log, which is actually quite useful because over a period of time this shows all the transforms that you perform, so over a matter of days, and when you want to clear that up you have to press this clear data button here. The information here is data about the processor that was used, when the transform actually took place, and the style sheet used for the transform, and some basic performance data in transactions per second. But there are more detailed logs which we can have a look at now. Actually, if we click on the view, and we're in XML view, but let's click on this just to bring up an Xpath Analyzer, because that can be quite useful, and we'll minimize this, and then we'll have a look. If we click results here, what that does is actually takes us to an XML report that is actually stored in the output area, but this is a quick way of viewing that report. So you could actually, if you want, use Xpath to analyze this, but we can just visually go through and see that there's a summary element that tells us basic details about where the input folder was, output folder location, the name of the processor, and details on the style sheet, plus if there were parameters that were used, then all the parameter details would also be shown here. We can see as well just a summary of the fact that there's 40 items processed with 36 passes and 4 fails. So all of that, and then we've got here this element, the passes element, contains a sub-element for each document that was processed, and then it details the input and the output. Now what we haven't actually done yet is an export, so perhaps we should go back and do an export now. Let's do an export. Now this report view always automatically goes back to showing the previous views, so in order to refresh that we have to click results here, and now we can see that for every document listed as well as an input and an output, there's also an export entry. So you can see that the output entry is actually prefixed with a number indicating the batch number of the test and a unique identifier for that item within the test. It's just to ensure that we have unique naming, because the output folder is in fact just a flat folder. There's no hierarchy to prevent naming conflicts, hence the need for a unique name. It's only when you come to export that you restore the original name, unless that is you choose to modify the let's quickly look at, if we look in files in the output, you can see that you can set to change the export extension to be different from the input extension. So I could put in, if I wanted my XML input to have an extension of HTML on the output, you would see that when looking at this. Again, it's flicked back, hasn't it? So if I go back here, you would see the extension here instead. And then of course, so we were looking at documents within the passes element, but there'll also be a fails element here, because we had 4 failures, and so there's a sub element for each one of those. So this gives you a good summary of all the information that happened. The other thing actually failed to mention so far is there's also a message that was generated for some of those items. So let's quick way of looking at all of those is to just put in that message query there. So, and of course one input file can generate a number of message outputs, and so there'll be a separate element for each message output that is listed in the hierarchy for that document entry. So that can be quite useful. And of course you've also got result documents. Now, as well as the principal output, there can be further result documents, and they would also be listed for each entry, and that can be shown in a later demonstration. So that really summarizes the data you would analyze about the actual transform, but it is quite useful to actually have a look at the folder structure as well. So if we go to the output folder, we can have a look. Let's bring this down to size to bring it within the view. So this is kind of a typical output folder, and you've got this folder at the top, reports. So that is the report for just the output itself, not for the export. So that is actually the report that we were viewing earlier before we exported. And then for each export you perform, a new folder's created, and a copy of the entire export is within each one of these. So you can see here the naming convention used for the output documents when everything is in a flat structure. But if we go to one of these export folders, there are 2 subfolders. One is called main, and one's the report directory called CWB report. So looking at that, that's got the export report actually that we were just looking at. But if we were to do a number of exports to the same destination, then you would see a number of reports in here to summarize all of that, the transforms. And then within main itself, what you've got here is a complete copy of the input folder, but with the modified files that were processed. But other files that weren't processed, like graphics and so on, they're still there to ensure that you've got your so also the CSS files. So they weren't processed or anything, but they're still preserved because it's important for when we're actually previewing the files. So that tells you something about the basic structure of where files are output, and that concludes this demonstration of how to analyze the report on an XSLT transform and to view the output files.